The candlelight danced softly over the table, casting shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. The aroma of the food enveloped the room as I watched James, my boyfriend, who seemed particularly nervous that night. My heart raced in my chest, a mix of anticipation and anxiety. It was a day like no other, and I could hardly contain the joy that flooded me. "Clara, you know how special you are to me, don't you?" he began, his voice trembling. I looked into his eyes, which shone with a mix of love and a hint of worry. "Of course I do, James. You make me feel unique every day," I replied, trying to reassure him. What was happening? He seemed so serious. He took a deep breath, as if searching for courage. "Today I want to make a promise to you. A promise that should last a lifetime." My heart skipped a beat. What was he about to say? The anticipation was almost palpable. Then, with an elegant gesture, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. The world around me faded for a moment. "Clara, will you marry me?" As he opened the box, a dazzling light spilled out, illuminating our faces. The ring was perfect, a gem I had dreamed of wearing one day. "Yes, yes, I will," I shouted, almost in disbelief. Tears of happiness streamed down my face as he slid the ring onto my finger. It felt as if all my dreams had come true in that single moment. I felt light, floating in a sea of happiness. "I promise I will always be by your side, Clara. You mean everything to me," James said, smiling, and the sparkle in his eyes was contagious. After dinner, I couldn't hold back my excitement. I called my friends, my voice trembling with joy. "You won't believe it. James proposed to me." Their shouts echoed on the other end of the line, and I laughed, feeling adrenaline rush through me. "Are you serious? That's amazing. We have to celebrate," Anna said, her excitement overflowing. Soon the sound of laughter and cheers filled the room. I shared every detail, from the food to the magical moment when I received the ring. However, as my friends jumped for joy, I noticed that James was distant. He leaned back in his chair, watching the celebration with a forced smile. A shadow of concern crossed his face. "Is everything okay?" I asked, worried. "Yes, of course. Just a very intense day, don't you think?" he replied, avoiding eye contact. The joy around me began to mix with a slight unease. What was wrong? Why did he seem so distant? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, warming my face. I woke up still radiant, thinking about the ring adorning my finger. However, as I opened James's nightstand drawer to grab my phone, something caught my attention. A small note was hidden inside, written in his handwriting. Curiosity consumed me. I took the note, and as I read it, my heart raced. "Old promise, never forgotten. Forever, Emily." The name was completely unfamiliar to me, and a wave of unease washed over me. What was this? Who was Emily? "James!" I called, my voice echoing through the house. He appeared in the doorway, looking surprised. "What does this mean?" I asked, holding the note in my hand. He hesitated, his expression shifting. "Oh, it's just a mistake from the past." He tried to deflect, but my mind was spinning with questions. "A mistake? What kind of mistake?" "Clara, it's nothing. Let's focus on us, on our future," he said, trying to smile, but the spark in his eyes had vanished. The happiness I felt the night before began to dissipate, leaving a trail of uncertainty. What else was he hiding? What lay behind that broken promise? The daylight poured through the window, but I could barely feel it. The note I had found in James's drawer weighed on my mind like an anchor. The phrase "old promise" echoed in my thoughts, and the unfamiliar name felt like a mystery I needed to unravel. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to confront him. With my heart racing, I waited for James to return from work. The sound of the door opening made my stomach churn. He walked in, smiling as if nothing was wrong. But I knew everything had changed. "Hi, love. How was your day?" he asked, taking off his jacket and flopping onto the couch. "James, we need to talk," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but the anxiety made me tremble. He raised his eyebrows, surprised by my serious tone. About what? He seemed genuinely confused. About the note I found, I said, sitting in the chair across from him, crossing my arms defensively. What does old promise mean? James hesitated, and that was all I needed to know. There was more to it. Oh, Clara, that's just a mistake from the past. It doesn't matter, he said, trying to avert his gaze. Past mistakes don't just appear out of nowhere, James. Who is this person? My voice rose slightly, revealing the anguish that consumed me. It's an old story. It's not worth reopening wounds. I've moved on from it, he said, but his expression was far from convincing. You can't just minimize this, James. I need to know the truth. My determination grew with every word. Clara, it's not that simple. I don't want you to worry about this, he replied, frustration evident in his voice. I have every right to worry. I'm about to marry you. I can't live with this kind of uncertainty, I said, feeling anger and sadness intertwine. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I promise I'll explain everything, but not right now. Let's leave this for later. Later never comes, James. I can't ignore what's happening. I need to understand. Silence settled between us. With each second, the emotional distance seemed to grow. If you don't want to tell me, I'll find out myself, I declared, getting up. Clara, don't do this, he shouted, but I was already determined. The thought of investigating on my own felt like the only way out. Like a storm, I left the apartment and headed to Bath, where my grandmother lived. If there were secrets, I would uncover them. Arriving at my grandmother's house, I was greeted with a warm hug and a comforting smile. But I wasn't there just for a visit. As Grandma prepared tea, I began rummaging through her things, searching for any clues about James's family. Clara, dear, what are you looking for? She asked, raising an eyebrow curiously. Just some old photos, Grandma. You know how curious I am about family history, I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. As I flipped through albums, a particular photo caught my attention. A woman who looked incredibly like me was standing next to James's grandfather. My heart raced. Who is this woman? I asked, pointing to the image. Ah, that's your great-aunt Helena. She had a complicated love story, my grandmother replied with a nostalgic sigh. Complicated how? I inquired, eager for more details. She fell in love with a man who wasn't accepted by the family. It was a forbidden love, my grandmother began to tell, but my mind was elsewhere, pondering how that story might be connected to me and James. Grandma, do you know if Helena had any connection to James's family? I asked, feeling like the puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. Well, I don't know much about that, but I know his family has always had secrets. Sometimes love has a strange way of intertwining, she replied, looking at me with an enigmatic glint in her eyes.
With my mind buzzing with possibilities, I left my grandmother's house determined to confront James again. What more would I discover? And how is it all connected? I needed answers, even if it meant reopening wounds he was trying to hide. The soft light streaming through the window of the small cafe in Bath reflected off the walls, creating a cozy yet unsettling atmosphere. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the space, but for me, it was just a backdrop to the storm brewing in my heart. I was about to meet Margaret, a friend of James's family, who promised to clarify some things about the ring I received, a symbol that felt more like a curse. When I saw her sitting at a table in the back, my stomach twisted. Margaret had well-kept gray hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to know all the nuances of family relationships. As I approached, she smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made me uneasy. "Hi, Clara. Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I knew you would come." "Hi, Margaret. Thank you for meeting me. I really need to understand what's going on," I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. Margaret took a deep breath before speaking. "You need to know that the ring James gave you has a story that involves another woman, someone who, well, was important to him." I felt my heart race. Another woman? Who is she? Her name is Lily. James and Lily were engaged before you. The ring you received was, in fact, a symbol of their commitment, Margaret said, her expression filled with compassion. But how could this be? He never mentioned any of this. I exclaimed, unable to contain the anger rising within me. James never wanted you to know. He ended things with Lily abruptly and hasn't spoken about the past since then. I believe he thought that by giving you the ring, he could leave it all behind, Margaret explained, her voice gentle. But unfulfilled promises always come back to haunt. And how do you know all of this? I asked, trying to keep my composure. I've known James's family for many years. I was friends with his mother. When Lily disappeared from their lives, it became a delicate subject. James has always been a good boy, but it's complicated, she replied, looking down at her hands. Lily was hurt badly, Clara. She still lives here in Bath. If you want, I can give you her address. I felt as if the ground was opening up beneath my feet. Why didn't James tell me? How could he involve me in all of this? Sometimes people act on impulse, Clara. They're afraid to face the truth. And the truth is that James hasn't completely moved on from his relationship with Lily. He's trying, but you deserve to know what's happening, Margaret said, her voice filled with sincerity. I need to talk to Lily. I need to understand what happened between them, I asserted, determined. If you decide to do that, be prepared. The conversation could be painful, but it's necessary, she warned, looking me in the eyes. I left the cafe, with my mind swirling with thoughts, each one more confusing than the last. The idea of confronting James's ex-fiancée was daunting, but the need for answers was greater. What did I really know about love? How could I trust someone who had entangled me in a web of lies and broken promises? That night, while gazing out the window of my room at the city lit by the moonlight, I realized I could no longer live in the shadow of a love that wasn't entirely true. What did I want? What did I deserve? I decided I needed to meet Lily. I needed to understand what this woman represented in James's life and, more importantly, what I represented to him. The fate was in my hands, and I wouldn't let myself be swept away by more broken promises. I needed clarity. I needed the truth. I still felt the echoes of James's words resonating in my mind as I walked to the cafe where we would meet. My heart raced uncontrollably, and each step felt like it brought me closer not just to him, but to a truth I feared. The table was reserved for us, just like always, but today the atmosphere felt heavier, almost suffocating. The scent of fresh coffee and the cheerful conversations around us couldn't comfort me. When I entered, I spotted James already seated, with an expression suggesting he was battling an internal storm. He looked up and smiled, but it wasn't a genuine smile, it was a mask. I sat down across from him, and before we could exchange any words, I was already pouring out everything I had kept inside. James, I can't live in this uncertainty anymore. I began, my voice trembling. I found out about the ring. I found out about your ex-fiancé. You need to tell me the truth. He took a deep breath, and I saw a shadow of pain cross his face. Clara, I didn't want you to find out this way. I thought that if we just forgot the past, everything would be fine. But it's not, James. I was almost shouting now, and a few heads turned toward us. You gave me a ring that wasn't yours to give. How do you think that makes me feel? He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. I didn't know how to handle it. The ring, it was a gift I didn't know how to return. It was a symbol of a commitment I couldn't fully break. Commitment. The word came out as a whisper, but the pain in my voice was palpable. You were committed to someone else and still felt comfortable asking me to marry you? How could you do this to me? I've always had conflicting feelings, he admitted, his eyes filled with frustration and regret. When I was with her, I didn't know I could find someone like you. But when I found her, everything changed. And I don't know how to deal with it. So, what do you feel for me? Is it real, or just a shadow of what you feel for her? The question hit like a blow, and I saw James shrink back. He looked lost, a man trapped between two worlds. Clara, I love you. I always have. But I didn't know how to break free from the past. When I gave you the ring, I thought I could finally move on, but I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. Those words cut deep. You want me to believe that the love you feel for me is enough to overcome your broken promises? He leaned in even closer, his eyes locked on mine, pleading for understanding. Please give me a second chance. I know I messed up, but I want to change. I want to make this right. My emotions were in conflict. I felt anger, betrayal, but part of me also wanted to believe him. How can you promise that you won't leave me in the dark again? How can I trust you after all this? I will do whatever it takes, Clara, he said, his voice firm. I'm willing to fight for us. You are all I want. Tears began to trickle down my face, hot and salty. I didn't know if I was ready for this, if I could open my heart again. James, I need some time. I need to think about all of this. He looked at me, desolate, and I realized that his struggle was as intense as mine. Please don't leave me. Not now. I stood up, feeling the weight of the decision crushing me. I'm not leaving you, James. I just need space, a moment to understand what I really want. I walked out of the cafe, tears streaming down my face now. The fresh air of the park and bath enveloped me, and I wandered aimlessly, trying to piece together the fragments of my broken heart. Where had I gotten myself into? The truth I sought was a double-edged sword, and I didn't know how to move forward. All I wanted was clarity, but the only thing I had were unanswered questions. As I walked through the park, the dry leaves crackled under my feet, and the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. I was lost in my thoughts, but something made me stop. It was a wooden bench, partly covered in moss, where my grandmother used to sit to tell stories about our family. Something within me urged me to return there, as if the memories etched in the wooden planks could offer me some clarity. I awkwardly sat down, and that's when I noticed a small wooden box beside me. It was a diary, covered in dust, but the recognition was instant. It was my grandmother's diary. With trembling hands, I opened the cover and began to flip through the yellowed pages, filled with cursive writing that seemed to dance before my eyes. The first pages spoke of young love, full of promises and dreams, but soon the tone shifted. The stories became darker, filled with betrayals and broken promises. Clara, love is a dance between light and shadow, my grandmother had written in one of her notes. The promises we make often fade like leaves in autumn. I felt a familiar pain, a connection to her suffering. Her words resonated within me, as if they were warning me not to follow the same paths. She always knew, I murmured to myself as a tear rolled down my face. My grandmother's story showed me that I wasn't the first woman to go through betrayals, and that love, while beautiful, could be treacherous. I read about a cousin who let herself be swept away by a love that betrayed her, and about an aunt who found herself trapped in promises that were never fulfilled. It was a cycle of pain that seemed to repeat, and I didn't want to be another in the line of succession. I decided that I wouldn't let that happen to me. I closed the diary and held it against my chest, like a shield against what was to come. I couldn't let history repeat itself. James had broken promises, but I still had the chance to rewrite my own future. The idea of planning my life without him began to take shape in my mind, a vision of freedom and self-discovery that I had never considered before. With this newfound determination, I stood up and went home. With each step, I felt I was shedding a weight I had carried for too long. As I entered my apartment, my heart skipped a beat when I saw James waiting for me, flowers in hand, and a pleading look on his face. The sight of him stirred a mix of emotions within me, pain, anger, but also a spark of hope. Clara, he began, his voice trembling, I'm so sorry. I truly am. Please listen to me. I never wanted to hurt you. The flowers swayed in his hand, but I couldn't look at them. Instead, my gaze locked onto his eyes. James, I said, my voice steady, I don't know if I can trust you again. What happened between us wasn't just a mistake. You gave me a ring that wasn't really yours to give. He let out a heavy sigh, as if the weight of his actions was finally coming down on him. I was confused. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I want to try, Clara. I want to be the man you deserve. But what about the promises you made? I questioned, frustration growing within me. You can't just take it back and expect everything to be okay. I am not a blank page that you can fill in whenever you want. James hesitated, and the tension hung in the air. I remembered my grandmother's words and the strength I needed to find within myself. I couldn't let myself be swayed by his words again. James, I need time. Time to think, to understand what I want. I can't just stand here waiting for you to decide what you want out of your life. I placed my hands on my hips and looked firmly into his eyes. He lowered his head, as if the words I had spoken hit him with the force of a storm. I understand, he finally replied, his voice low. I will wait. But please, don't pull away from me completely. I don't know if I can promise that, I said, and as I spoke, I realized that there was an uncertain future ahead of me, but also a path of self-discovery that I was about to embark on. Love could be complicated, but I was determined to write my own story, far from broken promises. The air was tense as I returned home, my mind still swirling with James's words. He was there in the living room, surrounded by flowers that seemed so vibrant and full of life, but at that moment, they only highlighted the pain I felt. He looked up at me as I entered, and a mix of hope and regret lit up his gaze. Clara, he started, but I raised my hand, asking for calm. I needed time to process everything I had discovered and, mainly, everything I still didn't know. James, I need space. But I also need to understand what happened between you and your ex-fiancé, I said, my voice firm but my heart racing. What's really behind that ring? He hesitated, as if the words were stuck in his throat. The silence dragged on, and I could feel the anxiety growing between us. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. Clara, I never told you the whole truth. My ex-fiancé, she is my sister, he said, his voice low, as if fearing the walls could hear. I stood in silence, trying to process the revelation. Your sister? I repeated, incredulity written all over my face. What do you mean, your sister?
Yes.
It's a long story. My mother had a relationship before marrying my father, and this woman, she was my mother, but not in the way you think. Her life got complicated, and my ex-fiancé is the result of that family confusion. The ring was a symbol of union, not romantic love. I never knew how to deal with it, he explained, his eyes filled with sincerity. The pieces began to fall into place, but the pain of betrayal still weighed heavily in my heart. And you never thought to tell me this before? I asked, frustration seeping into my voice. I didn't know how. I was so lost, Clara. What I felt for you was always real, but the shadow of my family haunted me. I didn't know how to handle it, or you, he replied, vulnerability evident in his gaze. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, that wished all of this was just a misunderstanding. But the pain of distrust still lingered. So, did you really love me? Even with all this confusion? Yes, Clara. My love for you was never a lie. The confusion was in how I dealt with things. I didn't know how to explain it to you, and that pushed me away. But now I know I need to be honest, he said, his voice nearly breaking. Hearing his words, a wave of emotions washed over me. Anger, pain, and confusion began to dissipate, giving way to a deeper understanding of what was at stake. Your secrets drove us apart, James. I can't just ignore that. For this to work, we need clear boundaries, I declared, feeling the need to establish a new path. I understand, Clara. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. Please give me a chance, he implored, the desperation in his voice touching a part of me that still believed it was possible to redeem what we had. Let's start over, I suggested, my heart still hesitant. But we need to be transparent with each other, no more secrets. I don't want to live in the shadow of broken promises. He nodded, a glimmer of hope rekindling in his eyes. I promise, Clara. Let's build a new story together. No secrets, just us. I felt a weight lift off my chest, as if I was finally starting to take control of my life. From that moment on, we knew the road would be tough, but we were willing to face it together. It was a new beginning, a rebirth amid pain and confusion, but above all, it was the chance to rewrite our story.